that demon?
It came back.
The Conjuring verse doesn't have phases. It doesn't have chapters. And at least to this point, we've been spared Ed and Lorraine Warren emerging out of a portal shoulder to shoulder with Father Merrin and Tangina Barons ready to snap Lucifer out of existence with shared prayer. Fingers crossed that keeps going. What the Conjuring verse does have is patience. And for horror fans that love the haunted house that James Wan built, that's been enough to keep the various spin-offs and sequels in the series distinct and approachable. That's why The Nun II, which I will remind you is a sequel to a prequel to a sequel, ends up being a rather delightful exercise for the franchise. It salvages the elements of The Nun which really worked, improves what didn't, and puts its lovable lead characters through a series of creative tortures and torments that serve as a reminder that as the franchise enters its 10th year, the Conjuring verse still has plenty of frights left in it. The Nun II sets itself apart from the Annabelle spin-offs, each of which center on a different family, and instead brings back Sister Irene and Frenchie for another round with Valak the Demon Nun. This decision largely pays off. Irene and Frenchie's screwball chemistry and eventual respect for each other was one of the best parts of The Nun, so centering the characters here benefits greatly from that groundwork. It's a little disappointing, though, that they're separated for the majority of the runtime. After a series of violent deaths in Catholic churches across Europe, Sister Irene is deployed to investigate. You may recall that Valak hitched a ride out of the Abbey of St. Carta stowed away in Frenchie's soul, so, put two and two together on that one. Of course, Irene doesn't know all that, hence the siloing. Luckily, Irene and Frenchie are deeply likable protagonists on their own merits. Sister Irene is much more confident and secure in her faith this time, and Taissa Farmiga delivers a sensitive and commanding performance in the role. It's a simple thing, but being convincingly scared on screen is no easy feat, and those Farmiga ladies bring that to the franchise in spades. Oh yeah, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, Taissa and Vera Farmiga, sisters! They're related! Which you could probably tell by looking at their last names or their faces. Irene's traumatic past, what put her on her path to the church in the first place, gets fleshed out a little bit in flashbacks peppered throughout, and her fight against Valak takes on new meaning in that context. But the ways in which her family's past key into the new additions to Conjuring mythology and the MacGuffin at the Nun II's heart are breezed over pretty quickly. Frenchie has taken up a job at a girls' boarding school as a professionally hot groundskeeper and has become close with a teacher there, Marcella, and her daughter Sophie. At the end of the day, much as I love Irenchi, fucking nailed it, and Jonas Bloquet's performance, his bigger role does feel like a double-edged sword. After all, The Nun ended with a pointed resurfacing of an early scene from The Conjuring in which Ed and Lorraine Warren screen footage of Frenchie's exorcism, reminding us that the character's fate is sealed to some degree. That plot armor takes some of the air out of the peril that Frenchie finds himself in throughout, but his growing affection for Marcella and Sophie really sells the tension once they're put into peril by Valak's attacks, and that extends to the rest of the students later on as the demon nun turns up the heat. In Frenchie's place as sidekick, it's now Irene that finds herself responsible for a novitiate. Sister Deborah, a black teen sent away from the racial hell of 1950s Mississippi by her family in favor of a safer life in the church. It's a deeply interesting setup for the character, which gets completely flattened into a retread of Irene's arc from the first film, where she's trying to make sure her faith is, super strong enough to fight a nun. Storm Reed brings undeniable personality to Sister Deborah, a nun who smokes. But after her introduction, her utility as the audience's surrogate mostly dominates her on-screen responsibilities, so the wrap-up of her character's crisis of faith feels more motivated by that than anything else. But Reed and Farmiga do share a standout action moment, continuing a weird trend 2023 has seen of hallway action scenes. Guardians 3 and TMNT Mutant Mayhem come to mind, where they essentially try to exorcise somebody while battling them down a hall. I guess everyone's got Old Boy on the brain on its 20th anniversary. While the Nun's Abbey of St. Carta remains one of my very favorite horror movie locales of the last few years, moving the Nun II's action to the more populated French village at its heart, and specifically to a boarding school, opens up more possibilities for Valak to plague characters other than the leads, which inevitably leads to some more creative and unexpected scares from all corners of the mid-century European architecture. There's even an extended sequence that is represented by this image right here that takes place in the middle of the movie and was surprisingly effective, even though a lot of it is featured in the marketing. A lot of the imagery, the faceless sub-nuns here, and that sort of flippy page thing where you think she's gonna pop out and then she doesn't pop out and then she actually pops out. It's the Conjuring bread and butter, but there's something to be said for actually still executing that effectively, and that scene is kind of a slow burn and it goes on for a while, and I really liked it actually. Director Michael Chaves spends much of The Nun II's first act throwing knives into the air, setting up forbidden locations and cursed games that will play out later on, including the triumphant debut of a scary, clompin', stompin' goat for the Conjuring franchise. And he draws these sequences out to fever pitch before letting hell break loose. And I know what you're gonna ask, is the scary, clompin', stompin' goat scarier than Black Phillip from The Witch? No, we're moving on. One out of left field, cruel attack on a child with no impact on the story in particular does a great job making the back half of the movie feel very unpredictable. The Nun II marks Chaves' third outing in the Conjuring verse after The Curse of La Llorona and The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It, and he's proven to be quite the steady hand. While neither of those films achieves the heights of the first two Conjuring movies, each has been an improvement on the last, and The Nun II continues that streak, coalescing Chaves' strong visual sensibilities and humanist interest into a funhouse of terrors. The specifics of The Nun II's mythology-heavy plot breeze by too fast to give the movie as much weight as it could have had, but on a visceral level, the film is both inventive with and reverent to Valak's malice. Moving the action to a boarding school full of scared kids amps up the stakes, with no character, except for Frenchie, ever feeling completely safe. Taissa, Farmiga, and Jonas Bloquet's Irene and Frenchie are a pair worthy of the Warrens, and director Michael Chaves keeps that heart in focus, even while adding to Valak's considerable reputation as being the world's worst nun. Thanks for watching, and hey, if you're not done having fun with The Nun, check out Michael Chaves' favorite scenes from the Conjuring verse. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.